I've got about 3 minutes after, so hopefully everybody had a chance to get something to drink and get settled. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're American River Trees, and we're presenting this, put this community Zoom meeting together to share information on the Army Corps of Engineers Erosion Control Project. We've got a couple of ground rules. If you could mute your mic when you're not speaking. We would like everybody to hold their questions until the questions and answers at the end. Be respectful of others and their opinions when they are speaking. And we are going to keep this presentation short. It's going to be somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. We're not going to make you sit and listen to me all night. Nobody wants to do that. I don't even like listening to me all night. So we'll try to make it quick. We're going to go over a lot of things to kind of bring you up to date on where the project is, but we want to leave a lot of time for questions and answers. We want you to be heard. We're going to stay on until all questions are addressed, and everybody that's wanted to ask a question or make a comment has had a chance to do that. And we are recording this session. We think there's people that might have wanted to join, but they can't. There's some climate change 30 by 30 biodiversity meetings going on tonight, and people can't be in two places at once. So we are recording it. We will post a link. We'll post a link on our website. We also have a YouTube page, and we can post the presentation on that or put a link to it on that. So if you could follow those ground rules, that would be great. So who are we and who am I? My name's Pete Spalding. I live on Rio Bravo Circle, just east of Larchmont Community Park. I'm about one of 20 people who've come together under the name of American River Trees. We're definitely a diverse group of people, engineers, scientists, biologists, taxpayers, professionals, and just passionate citizens who've done a deep dive into this extensive project. And almost every one of us, if you ask us why we live here, it's because we want it to be close to the river. We want it to be close to the parkway. We want it to be close to nature. We believe that the project is over-designed and that the same level of erosion control can be achieved with far less destruction to the parkway. When we first learned about the project, we spent our time learning as much as we could. We spread the word as far as we could, and we encouraged as many people as possible to comment before the February 23 comment deadline. After that, we tried to get meetings with the Corps. We were unsuccessful, and they directed us to work with the Bank Protection Working Group, which meets only about once every 3 months. We continue to spread the word about the negative impacts of the project. We've been speaking at the Central Valley Flood Protection Board meetings since February. We speak at the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency board meetings and the Sacramento County Board of Supervisor meetings to let elected officials know that, number one, there's thousands of people who believe that there's a better way to achieve the erosion control that we need without destroying the American River Parkway for generations to come. We've written to Congressman Berra and Congresswoman Matsui expressing our concerns. We've met with some of Dr. Berra's staff. We've had some dialogue with Supervisor Rich Desmond, who's on the SAFCA board. We've also attend numerous other events that are related to the parkway, like the ECOS Earth Day celebration, the Great American Triathlon that was run along the parkway, and we're just participating in the Fall Fest yesterday that was coordinated, not yesterday, Sunday, by the Preserve the American River Association. Now, I was going to turn off my camera here, but I can't figure out how to do it, so you're stuck with me in the corner someplace. So here's a quick overview of the project. But first, I want to mention this. I'm going to refer throughout this presentation to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Corps. They're the sponsoring federal agency. Now, keep in mind that the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board are non-federal sponsors. They have money invested in this project, and they have a say in the project. So our concerns grew out of what we saw in the Campus Commons, Sac State, Paradise Beach areas of the Parkway. The work that the Corps undertook in this area included some widening of the river channel to account for larger water flows, and it also included a lot of erosion control. It was the condition in which the riverbank and the parkway was left that really disturbed us so much. You can see on the left sites 2.1, 2.3, the left screen is the work that got everybody attention. I think that was part of contract 2. And you can see on the right, the area from Howe Avenue on the left, all the way to that little brown area on the right side of the screen, which is Larchmont Community Park, is the site that is in environmental review right now. So these are some pictures on the work in contract 2. The first one there, you can see on the picture, contract site 2.1. What we really want to show in these pictures is the extent of the tree and vegetation removal. These pictures were taken, I think, in the spring of this year. Some additional vegetation has been added. Some had to be replanted because the original plantings were just cooked by the summer sun and heat because there wasn't any vegetation left to provide any shade for those new plantings. This is site 2.2. So you can see that that's a lot closer to Howe Avenue. And this is, I believe, how it looked in the fall of last year. This site has been mentioned by the Corps as being very similar to the site near Sarah Park along the section of the river by Larchmont Community Park. And according to the Corps' words, it'll have similar erosion control techniques used in this area. And then this is site 2.3, a little closer to Sac State. Again, you can see the extent of the tree and vegetation removal compared to the nearby landscape. So this is an example of the work that was just recently completed, and that's what got everybody's attention. So as I mentioned, it's the erosion control methods at these downstream sites that really alerted us. The next phase of the Corps' work extends east from Howe Avenue to Estates Drive on the north and to the Mayu Drain on the south side of the river. The erosion control methods proposed are the same as they use downstream. The Corps plans on removing existing vegetation, including grasses and brush and trees, including about 685 trees, many of which are heritage oaks. Now, to be considered a heritage oak, that means the tree has to have a circumference of 60 inches, the distance around the outside of the tree, measured about 4.5 feet above the ground. This is about equal to a tree that's 19 inches in diameter or roughly 1.5 feet in diameter. Trees like this are about 100 years old. Several of the trees that are going to be taken down in this area have been measured by folks in our group, and some are 330 years old. There are many that are over 100 and 200 years old. The bottom line is that based on the information in the earlier reports prepared by the Corps, the General Reevaluation Report in December 2015, the supplemental environmental reports that just came out in December 2023, we do not believe that the river conditions and velocities modeled for 160,000 cubic foot per second design flow warrant the level of erosion protection proposed. The techniques proposed require excessive removal of existing trees and vegetation. There are alternative techniques that can be used to provide adequate erosion protection. So this is a sample of some of the erosion protection methods that the Corps is planning. Again, these were used in contract 2, and they're being proposed for contract 3. As you can see, they all require lots of construction at or just above the river's edge. To perform the construction, the Corps needs to bring in heavy construction equipment, most of which is going to be diesel powered. The use of the heavy construction equipment is responsible for much of the tree and vegetation removal. And remember, if you've got questions on this that you want to have answered, jot them down and then raise your hand at the end of the presentation. So first of all, as I said, we disagree on the extent of or the type of erosion control methods that need to be implemented based upon the river velocities. But in addition to that, there are plenty of other flaws in the environmental documents. Number one, there was minimal community involvement. Hardly anybody was notified of this project in the past, whereas years ago, when the Corps did their slurry wall work from Gristmill area all the way down to the city, there was a lot of advertisement of that, notification of residents and what they could expect. But on this, there was very little. Only after a lot of citizens and local officials complained about a 45-day review period over the Christmas and New Year holidays did the Corps extend the comment period by 15 days. We got a total of 69 days to comment instead of the minimum requirement of 45 days. 45 days is a minimum, not the maximum. There were also 2 Zoom community meetings, which accepted questions but provided no answers. There were about 170 and 190 people that participated in each of those meetings. And the environmental review never mentioned things like the air quality benefit of trees and vegetation and the creation of heat islands. The environmental reports barely mention that the American River is designated as wild and scenic by both federal and state governments. A matter of fact, it's the only river with that designation in a metropolitan area in the entire country. The Belt Parkway is managed by the American River Parkway Plan, which is incorporated into state law. We believe that the project violates several policies of that plan, including balanced management, terrestrial resource policies, aquatic community policies, and even their flood control policies. And the Parkway receives over 8 million visits annually. It generates over $365 million each year for the local economy. It's an economic driver partly because of that wild and scenic designation. The project is so extensive now, when you look at it from starting way down by Paradise Beach all the way up now to Estates Drive and the Mayu Drain, it really threatens the delicate balance of our local ecosystem. It disrupts a long proven, stable, wide, well-reinforced section of the American River. The Parkway it's a wildlife corridor. It leads from downtown Sacramento all the way to Folsom Lake. And the loss of significant vegetation will undoubtedly disrupt the habitat for several endangered species, including Chinook salmon, as well as steelhead, as well as disturbing the nesting areas for many resident and migratory fowl birds. This type of destruction can further disrupt the local food web, leading to cascading negative effects on the biodiversity of the whole parkway. Another thing the environmental reports failed to mention or discuss was the use of the river by members of nearby disadvantaged communities for recreation. The Parkway provides rare green spaces and valuable mental health benefits to tourists and residents. The project will significantly impact these communities by reducing opportunities for free, no-cost recreation, as well as avoiding the summer heat. Although now maybe we should include the fall heat as well. But here is a free source of recreation for all the residents that is being disturbed for generations to come. Another concern we had is the evaluation of risk, how the Corps evaluated which sections of the river were at most risk. One of our members, Bill Bratton, who just recently appeared in Inside Sacramento magazine, took this photo at River Mile 10.5, which is right near Larchmont Community Park, on February 10th, 2017. At this day, the river was flowing at roughly 82,000 cubic feet per second. And this was the highest level that the river has reached since 1997. If you look at that picture, you can see that Bill's dog is just standing there in about a foot of water, and the water is barely moving. This reemphasizes our point that as the river flow increases, the velocities adjacent to the levee and the bank are still relatively slow, well under 2 miles an hour and well under the stated 5 to 8 feet per second that trees can withstand. The trees and the vegetation help to slow the flow during the high flow events, and their roots offer bank stability. The mass tree and vegetation removal over such a long stretch of the river from Paradise Beach up to the Mayu Drain could actually be making us less safe and not more safe. The environmental reports were available online. They were all designed to be printed on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. But even though they were online, they were still incredibly hard to read. Detail in the maps and drawings were lacking. For example, this is a map that shows the velocity of the river in the area just east of Watt Avenue. And you can see how difficult it is to interpret the velocities. There's a color coding section of this that's not in the screen, but it's very difficult to ascertain where the velocities change. The screens are just so pixelated. It made understanding, it even made commenting on the environmental reports very difficult. So riprap is one of the techniques that the Corps is going to use a lot in this stretch of the river to prevent erosion. And these pictures are, I believe the one on the left is right around the 8th Street Bridge. And I think the one on the right is near the Campus Commons golf course. The Corps' approach is to bring in tons and tons of the quarried rock and the riprap, and they're supposed to protect the shoreline against scour and water. There's a saying in the industry that we've learned, riprap begets riprap. And it means once you start using riprap, you need to add more and more to prevent end scour. One of the main reasons the Corps divined or looked at the river in such long stretches or subreaches was to avoid what they call end scour. Again, we believe that the river velocities and the conditions do not warrant such excessive erosion techniques and destructive measures to put those erosion techniques in place. So we believe, based on the research that we've done and talking with other engineers and even other people that have worked for the Corps in other parts of the country, that there are definitely better ways to provide the erosion protection that we need without destroying the river. The Corps did not present to the public any alternative designs. This is required by the California Environmental Quality Review Act, known as CEQA. We've researched and suggested to the Corps alternative techniques that would save more trees as well as the habitat. And some of the suggestions are to, based on the modeled river velocities, just use smaller rock and use it over smaller areas. The Corps has their own Engineering with Nature project champions and nature-based solutions techniques. They have considered the champion, and projects are supposed to have an Engineering with Nature champion. We can't identify who that was for this project. They can use biotechnical techniques such as branch packing, willow wattles, brush mattresses, live crib walls where appropriate. And again, if you want to ask about any more of these in the question and answer period, we'll do our best to try to explain those to you. The other thing we learned as we were working on this was that the Corps is not infallible. They do make mistakes. A 2003 Government Accountability Office report on the improved analysis and costs of benefits needed for the Sacramento flood protection. And this was the project that involved the slurry walls, again, from Grist Mill down to the city of Sacramento. It concluded, and I quote, "It is critical that decision-making and priority setting be informed by accurate information and credible analysis. Reliable information from the Corps about the costs and benefits for the American River component of the Common Features Project has not been present to this point. The analysis on which Congress has relied contains significant mistakes." Then in another report that was issued just 2 weeks ago on September 18th, the Corps, it addressed the Corps' status of construction project environmental mitigation. the GAO stated, the Corps stopped reporting information on the extent of mitigation activities for the operation and maintenance of projects after its fiscal year 2019 report. And this was because they had so many errors in their mitigation reporting that they just decided to stop reporting on it. So we do have links to those two reports if you're interested in those. And finally, there was a book that was written, Words Whispered in Water, that found that the New Orleans levee boards were not the ones to blame for the devastating flooding that resulted from Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And it wasn't the size of Katrina that was to blame. It was the fact that the flood walls were improperly designed by the Corps, and they failed way before the design values, and that caused the loss of life and property in New Orleans. And we have our own little experience with the Corps not being infallible. This is a section of the work that was recently completed just west of Howe Avenue on the north side of the river. And these pictures were taken in the fall, in February of this year. Now, what happened was the surface water from all the rain that we had ran down from the top bank by the bike trail and started to erode the work that the levee as the, not the levee, but the bank of the river as it had been left. So the work that the Corps did to prevent erosion down by the water line, actually, the way they left it, they caused erosion at the top. And as you can see there on the picture, the second from the left, you can actually see the exposed rock and riprap that they had buried in there. So does that make us safe, or are we becoming less safe as a result of the work of that they're doing? So in the last couple of months, we've made a lot of Freedom of Information requests and California Public Record Act requests of both the Corps and the Sacramento area flood control agencies. Among other things that we found, we obtained these maps, and these are labeled, if you can read just below the pictures themselves, they say Contract 3B preliminary 100% designs. So that means that they're pretty much done with their design for this section of the work. And these pictures show no meaningful reduction in the area designated for vegetation and tree removal compared to what was originally presented in the December 2023 draft environmental reports. In fact, if you blow this up and look closely to the map on the right side, you can see where Larchmont Park is mentioned there. There's a little yellow area right above the red truck. And in that area, those trees were originally marked as being protected. But if you look at it in this diagram, it now says possible tree removal, depending on considerations by the contractor. So they're leaving it up to the contractor to decide whether or not those trees can stay or need to be taken out. So throughout all this, like I said, we've been presenting information at SAFCA, at the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, writing to Congresswoman Matsui and Congressman Berra, and this is what we're asking for. A pause to the project, increased community engagement, development of alternative designs, taking into account the best available data and modeling, federal and state climate change initiatives, engineering with nature principles and nature-based solutions to achieve a balance between flood protection, erosion control, and conservation of our wild and scenic American river. A project that generations will be proud of, not one that will take generations from which to recover. And this is the message we keep presenting to the County Board of Supervisors, Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and the Corps itself. We want a win-win-win situation. We can do it. It can be done. So in the last week, I think it was September 26th, the Corps posted these statements on their website. Originally, the environmental review was supposed to be completed by now, and construction was going to begin in the summer of 2025. There was even some fear that they might even start construction this fall. But last week, they said because of a delay in the certification of the environmental reports, and part of that is because 1,900 people commented on those reports, that the earliest they'll be able to certify the reports and then start on construction, the earliest the construction could begin is 2026. And incidentally, going back, way back to those, the contract work that was done in contract 2, I believe that the Corps received a total of about 50 comments during the environmental review periods for those projects. As I said, on this contract 3B, they got over 1,900 comments. So this is a little bit of a victory. It's not really a pause, it's a delay, but we're going to focus our efforts to make the Corps conduct meaningful community engagement. And by that, we mean dialogue and conversation, not lectures without answers. And we want them to develop design alternatives, incorporating engineering with nature principles and champions, nature-based solutions, and consideration for climate change initiative and the governor's 30 by 30 plan. And that plan, governor's 30 by 30 plan, aims to conserve 30% of California's land and coastal waters by the year 2030. So here are the ways that you can help. We have almost 2,000 signatures now on a petition that insists that the Corps of Engineers work with local, state, and federal officials and the public to reassess their proposals and methods and achieve a balance that does not destroy hundreds of trees and degrade the river and the parkway for generations to come. You can write to Congresswoman Matsui and Congressman Berra and tell them you want flood protection and erosion control, but you want it done right without sacrificing the American River Parkway. You can spread the word among your friends, your family, your colleagues. If you're in a neighborhood association or a group or a club, invite us to come speak or provide a Zoom presentation like this. We've done that for other neighborhood associations in the area already. And on top of that, a week from Sunday, October 13th, in Larchmont Community Park, we're going to have river tours. People can come about 11:30. We're going to have free hot dogs and chips and sodas. And at 12 o'clock, and then again at 1:30, we're going to take people out. We'll take you up on top of the levee. If you're interested in walking down to the river's edge, we can probably arrange that. We'll point out the areas in this stretch of the work that are at risk. You can see for yourself the amount of vegetation that's there, the shape that the river banks are in now, and we can point out the areas where the Corps intends to install their rock trenches and rock tows and those other types of things. We'll have some activities for the kids. We'll have a lot of information out there. You'll be able to sign our petition, and it's so much better if you can see this up close and personal rather than on a bunch of slides. So I think, I don't know how I did on time. I guess I probably went a little too long, huh? But we know you probably have questions. What we'd like to have you do is raise your hand to ask a question. Unmute yourself when you're called upon. You can find the mic icon along the bottom of the screen. Tell us your first name, give us your question, or if you want to make a comment. If you're uncomfortable in talking in front of the group, if you prefer, you can write a question into the chat. Candace is going to take a look. She'll monitor the chats and bring them up. And then we have some of our members, people other than myself, that are more knowledgeable than I am, that will do their best to answer their questions or address your comment. So with that, Candace, I can't see right now. I'm going to have to, I think the only way I can see what's going on is if I stop sharing my screen, and I don't know if you want me to do that. So if you could, tell me what you'd like me to do.
Okay, there aren't any questions in the chat yet, and I don't see anybody's hand raised. Oh, I see. Lisa Merritt says this was excellent. Thank you. Can someone talk about the impact of removing trees on other floods, like Santa Cruz in Mississippi?
You know, Bill Avery, I know that I have heard quoted, I can't think of the source right now, that I don't think there's any data anywhere in the country that says a levee breach was caused by a tree going down. And also the levee breaches that have occurred tended to be in areas where vegetation was removed. Bill, could you provide any more? And I want to make sure I'm saying that right.
Not that I know of. It's more likely in areas where vegetation is removed and the materials there are sandy and sort of decompose easily under flood conditions. I think Josh might have investigated this. He's our historian. Josh, do you have any knowledge of any place where tree removal caused flooding?
Oh, where it caused flooding?
Yeah, where flooding
No,
resulted.
I don't. I mean,
I
there
don't
was,
think there is.
you know, the Army Corps of Engineers did a review in 2010 or 2011. I think the UBS Corporation did one for, I think, DWR, also around the same time. You know, UBS looked at California's, you know, history, and there really isn't any. I don't think there's any examples of trees being a direct cause of or even being associated with levee failure in, you know, review of thousands of records.
One of our concerns here is that with the tree removal, we will see an increase in flow velocities in the river at flood stage, much higher flows at the levees themselves than would have happened if the trees were never removed. So that's, you know, obviously increases the risk level.
Okay, so want to go on to another question?
Yeah, from iPad Joy, what is being done to mitigate for the loss of shaded riverine habitat? So we can talk about mitigation. Or the trees that they've the woody vegetation that they have chained to the
Yeah, I
bank.
think some of the mitigation, I'll try to start off. Some of the mitigation is tried into what is now known as the American River Mitigation Site, which was, and I might butcher the name of the property, the Iridia property, down near east or west of Cal Expo, down near REI in that area. That is being reconfigured to provide a spawning area for salmon. And it's a separate contract from 3B, but that is part of the area. Then, as Candace mentioned, the use of the in-stream woody material, much as you can see again on that stretch from Howe Avenue looking west to the Guy West Bridge, it's most noticeable in there, I think, where those are actually almond trees from orchards that they've anchored down, and that's supposed to simulate the root systems and the vegetation along the bank of the river that provide areas where the salmon hatchlings can hide and grow up to be big and strong before they go out to the river. So those are some of their mitigation techniques. I'm not as up to date on the rest of the details of mitigation and probably that I should be. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to mention that the where they tied those trees down is actually they're up out of the water in the fall during the salmon run. So to the extent that they might help the salmon or hatchlings, for the most part, they're not even going to be in the water. And then they're kind of not the most attractive things either if you've seen them. I would think that they might be a hazard for fishermen or swimmers or pets trying to swim in the water. You know, you're getting more likely get snagged when you're fishing, or they could be, you know, a hazard for rafters or kayakers or swimmers, because it's basically just a tied almond tree in the water. I don't know, maybe we could share some pictures, but I have some. And I was going to say, if there's some interest, I have a few slides I could run through on the engineering side of this too.
They
Well, I would like
definitely
to-
are, they're definitely unsightly and definitely impact access to the river. Beth, did you have something to add on this?
Yeah, I thought I would just add a little bit on the mitigation. So yeah, we have a lot of concerns with the mitigation. There were a lot of deficiencies in what they presented, what the Corps presented. And part of the problem is that they do both what they call on-site mitigation and off-site mitigation. And the off-site mitigation, as Pete mentioned, it's way down the river, it's 10 miles away. And what they do at the site, the on-site mitigation, generally replaces big, tall, shady trees with short vegetation, some willows and some coyote brush. And so it changes the nature of the site dramatically. They don't leave it with the same mix of species as what was there. So that's important for shade from both people and the shade for the fish, and just the overall use of that habitat by creatures in general.
Thank you, Beth. Bill, did you want to share something?
Well, go on into the next questions, and if we have time, I can share some slides at the end. If there's still, are we trying to go till 8 o'clock? Because if so, I could
We
fill
can-
that time at the end.
Yeah, we could definitely come back to it, I think.
Yeah, but let's,
Yeah.
let's. make sure we
Yeah, let's
answer-
answer the questions first, and I can do that if there's time.
Okay, so from Katie Thomas, I'm curious if anyone has looked into the upcoming Prop 4 and its possible impact on river protections.
I am not up to date on Prop 4. And is that, Katie, is that local, statewide? We can look into it.
If you wanted to, Katie, you can you don't have to, but if you wanted to unmute your mic and tell us a little bit about it, you're welcome to.
Hi, yes, it is a statewide prop and it includes a lot of conservation, clean water, a number of things that it sounds really good, but I'm just so unsure of the small print and what that would mean for a project like the Corps is doing or planning.
Yeah, I guess we could look into that. I'm looking at my little election book right now to see if I can find out any more, but Candace, you want to go on to the next question and maybe we can do some research on that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that to our attention, Katie. We will look into that. So let's see. Lisa says, how will the project affect the salmon run? So we've gone into some shade loss. So the shade loss affects the water temperature. Does anybody, Bill Avery, our biologist here, or Beth, do you have anything else to add to that?
I could say a couple things. One thing is the National Marine Fisheries Service is reviewing this process as well. And from what I understand, they're not terribly enamored with the SEIR as it stands right now. However, it may pass, which means that it may not severely impact the salmon runs. However, riprap is not as attractive for salmon coming down out of their spawning sites, out of the redds, you know, where the eggs are laid. The edges of the water are going to be a lot less habitable for those fish that are trying to grow up. There's also going to be a lot less shade. So this sort of thing has been pointed out as potentially impacting future generations of salmon. So that is one of our concerns. It's also the National Marine Fisheries concerns.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Annette, she says, consider doing a talk to Renaissance Society. They have one-time forums for community members to present. Now is the time to sign up for this program. Visit the Sacramento State on the Renaissance page. This could be an introductory for many seniors to this destructive project. Great suggestion, Annette. We'll have to look into that.
I'll have to see if any of our members are members of the Renaissance Society, because I know you do have to request to make a presentation there, so we can look into that. Annette, if you have any connections to the Renaissance Society, if you could maybe put them in the chat, somebody that we should contact, that would help us out.
Okay, great. Our own Josh Thomas says URS, not UBS. You might have to explain to us what you're talking about there, Josh. They reviewed 10,000 records from the Urban Levee Evaluation Project and non-urban levee evaluation project and found no instances of where vegetation was connected with levee breach. This is going back to a previous question about have trees ever been to blame for issues?
Yeah, for levee failures.
For levee failure, yes, thank you. Thank you, Josh. Did you have anything else to add about that, Josh?
No.
Okay. And Lisa is adding some things in the chat here, some like articles and some other resources that you can click on for more information. Barbara Domek says, thank you for an excellent presentation. My questions are really to be asked of the USACE project managers, but here are my concerns. Number one, will wildlife be carefully and humanely trapped and relocated prior to the severe demolition or allowed to suffer and die when their dens, nests, food sources are destroyed? So we'll tackle one of your questions at a time. So we'll do that first one. Will there be any relocation or humane options for our species affected?
I think Bill Avery did the deepest dive of anybody into the environmental reports, and I know the part that I looked at, I don't recall anything about that. I do recall somebody saying that somebody asked a question of that, like that, of the Corps about wildlife, that it was going to go, and the response was, well, they'll just move up the river.
I think that they were just, their only thing they had on that was they were going to do their vegetation removal, I think starting in the fall or at some point in the year when it would be supposedly least impactful. That doesn't mean it won't cause problems, but and then also I think there was something about avoiding time when the western pond turtle was migrating up and down the banks. But as far as trapping and so forth, I haven't seen anything like that, no.
I think it's a lot of displacing the
Yeah,
animals
it's like,
and thinking that they'll
fend
go
for
to the other
yourself.
side. Yeah, I think it's like, well, they'll go to the other side, but I think that they don't look at it on the grand scale. You know, they've done so much destruction downstream, and if they plan to go further upstream, it's like, where are you displacing them to? So, did any of our other folks or other people, art people, have anything else to say about the displaced animals?
I would just say, this is Josh, that, if there is stuff about what to do about certain species, it would probably be found in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's biological opinion. They gave one in 2021. but that's really mostly just related to species that would be covered under the Endangered Species Act. So, you know, the yellow-billed cuckoo and the elderberry, or the what is it called? The valley elderberry longhorn beetle. That's why they have to, for instance, do most of their vegetation removal in the fall and winter to avoid those species nesting season.
But yeah, they don't account for all the species that we think that they should account for. Okay, thank you. And Barbara's last question here, will natural sandy beaches be left, I'm sorry, her second question, will the bike trails, shady protective tree canopy be preserved to protect bicyclists, hikers, runners from overexposure to blistering refracted heat and UV rays currently shielded by the existing canopy on the remaining intact stretches of the trail?
I would say on that, the stretch from Howe Avenue to Watt Avenue on the north side of the river is at risk. There will be two sections in there that'll have a lot of tree removal, whether or not it's the trees adjacent to the bike trail or further downstream. But that stretch between the bike trail and the river's edge is so narrow in there. I'm afraid that's going to lose a lot of the tree canopy. The trees that are on the land side of the bike trail, on the levee side of the bike trail, and not on the water side of the bike trail, are less likely to be removed. I think they're just at risk from the construction equipment that's going to be traveling nearby to them. As far as once you get east of Watt Avenue, there's not as much tree removal being planned, and the bike trail is a little bit further away from the water's edge. But the bike trail itself from Estates Drive all the way down past Howe Avenue, I believe that's going to be closed to bike traffic, and the bicyclists will be rerouted on the local streets there.
And again, a lot of the levee access would be closed for 2+ years during
Mhm.
construction. And we understand your concern because we understand the benefits, the many benefits of trees, especially the shade and protection from the heat. Okay, her last question here, will natural sandy beaches be left intact with no riprap or chained dead orchard trees, like we were talking about for the fish, allowing for recreational access to the water's edge for fishing, wading, kayak, rafting, put-ins, and takeouts?
I'm going to go back to this map here. And if you look in the area again, you got Howe Avenue on the left, Mayu Drain on the far right. If you look at those red areas that are closest to the water's edge, like from Howe Avenue to Watt on the north side of the river, I'd say in those areas, any beaches, water takeouts are definitely at risk. The same if you look on the south side of the river from Watt Avenue to the Mayu Drain. Those areas, as a matter of fact, there's going to be extensive construction down by Watt Avenue. Although I believe there the riprap is going to be buried, and then it's going to be covered over by the parking lot and the roadway. Exactly how far down it goes to the river, I'm not sure. I think you'll probably still have river access there, but the stuff further east is definitely at risk, especially in the area by Larchmont Park.
Okay, Beth, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the comments that was strongly made during the comment period by many, many people is that the Corps' environmental impact report and analysis only considered a few kinds of recreation. You know, they did consider the bike trail, but in this area on the south bank of the river, there are many of these small access trails and small beaches. And that was a very big concern for many people in their comments, because they're they didn't even inventory them. And if you don't inventory them, you can't protect them. So we don't have much confidence that they are actually looking out for those things or would replace them.
Thank you, Beth. Okay. Carrie Hart has a question. Will this kind of work be continued upriver for us in the future? Can you talk more about the alternative natural methods that could be used and the discrepancy in what flow we need to be able to be protected in some literature? So let's address the first part of her question there. Will there be work continued upstream?
I might handle that one. As far as I know, this is the extent, furthest extent upstream that they're planning on doing any erosion work. As you move further upstream, the riverbank gets a lot wider, and as does the river. And then at some point, even further upstream, just before Gristmill, the levee actually stops because the surrounding land itself is high enough that you don't need a levee. So to my knowledge, Larchmont Park, Mayhew Drain is the furthest upstream it's planned to go. But that doesn't mean they might not change their minds.
Yeah, I was going to add that I believe that general reevaluation report that was done in 2015 only extended as far east. I think it only went to the Gristmill area. So I think in order to do any further work further upstream, they would have to do another reevaluation report. At least they'd have to do that first before anything could be planned.
Beth?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of weigh in on that as well. That general reevaluation report and the scope of it did go all the way to Gristmill. There could have been work all the way to Gristmill, but they managed to the Bank Protection Working Group folks did try very hard to get some of that area removed from the plan, so that now the only extent is up to Mayhew, but we are also trying to remove some more of that extent because we don't believe that there's a strong need in this area of very wide, straight river here either. And so there's no guarantee that they wouldn't go further, that the authorization did go all the way to Gristmill. So we're keeping an eye on that as well.
Great. And so she'd like us to talk more about the alternative natural methods that could be used. And then maybe a second part would be the discrepancy in what flow we need to be able to be protected in some literature. So maybe we can talk about some of the more in depth on the nature-based solutions.
That I would, Bill Avery, could you weigh in on that? And or if you wanted, I can share my screen with you, Bill, in case you want to bring up any of those diagrams that you had.
I'll start sharing my screen for just a second.
Well, I need to stop sharing mine, right,
No,
Candace?
he's already got it. It's coming up.
Oh, okay.
All right, can you see this?
Yes.
Yep.
See code.
So this would be just sort of an example. In this area, if they go ahead with their plan, what you'll see here is a bulldozing of all those green trees on the left, and that slope will be bulldozed out. And they're going to lay in riprap on the bank, and they're going to pile in riprap on this, where you see the gravel there. And instead of that, because their own models show that the flow velocity is 160,000 CFS, which is as much as the levee systems are rated for, and that would be the 200-year flood event that could happen, probably won't, but could happen. At that flow, even at this site, right where you see those little words, those numbers there, we only see 3 to 4 feet per second of flow at 160,000 CFS. And so if you are wondering about safety, different measures of engineering are allowed if you're under 8 feet per second. And this entire area where they're planning to propose to do work in contract 3B is in that category. it's under 8 feet per second. In this case, it's 3 to 4 feet per second, which would allow something like 6-inch cobble mix, rounded cobble mix to be put in here to reduce erosion. And further down here, I don't know if I'll spend all this much time on it. There's some banks that show some exposure. There are different types of methods. One of them is called branch packing, where you build in soil and add living willow branches. They'll sprout and they'll branch out and they'll actually hold that soil in place. So there's ways of actually bringing in soil instead of having to remove the entire bank and then bring in riprap. So we're trying to promote those sorts of things. There's a whole bunch of other techniques too, but we're kind of running out of time. So I think I probably should cut this answer short. That's some ideas anyway. I can show you a couple things. Maybe that description is good enough.
Well, remember too, we're not just gonna cut it off at 8 o'clock.
I can't go on forever myself, though.
Well, you don't want to do that, but
Yeah.
we want to try to get to all the questions.
It would be nice to see that diagram.
Okay, so here's a couple of things that I can show that are different alternatives. This one here is called a living or live crib wall. It's a small feature that can be put up against a short bank, just 2 or 3 feet high. A bank that's eroding or in danger of eroding. It's a wooden structure. It's filled, with cobbles and then planted, soils on top. The trees and the willows that are planted in there will actually grow over, and their roots are going to form their own armoring. These are features that are used in many different places for biotechnical engineering. Here's that branch packing technique illustrated. The lower branches that are going sort of horizontal, those are living branches that are put in there. You can see this area that the bank has been eroded. These are inserted horizontally and fresh topsoil is placed around them. They're packed in there. And then they're actually held in place too by the verticals. And all of that holds the soil in place itself. They'd probably put some sort of material, geotextile over the top of it while it's starting to grow. But then the roots, as you see, is the older plants are indicated up at the top. The roots start holding it all together. The willows or whatever trees that are planted in there start branching out, and it becomes a living structure. And that is a biotechnical technique for this sort of a erosional problem. So those are some of the options. Any other questions about that, or?
No, that was good, Bill. It's good to know because that's just one of the many options.
There's many options, and yeah, we're none of us are qualified engineering with nature engineers necessarily, and so one of our requests is to bring on board or have the Corps bring on their own engineering with nature division, an engineering with nature mentor or champion, as we call it, as they call it, to help come up with whatever the best design is for these situations that we have and do it in a site-specific way. All right, let's see if I can stop sharing the screen.
And the Corps has a whole engineering with nature division and initiative. And this would have been a great example of a place they could have used it, but they didn't even consult with them as far as I know.
Right.
And they claim this is engineering with nature just because they're going to do planting benches and replant with coyote brush and so forth. But to me, that's just wiping out nature and replacing it with, plantings of things that aren't necessarily compatible with this environment or the habitat and the whole environmental food web. And certainly won't provide the shade that we have right now, ever.
Josh, did you have something? No, he wanted to say goodnight to his kid. Okay. All right. So, Carrie, if we didn't answer the last part, the discrepancy in the flow, we need to be able to be protected in some. If we didn't answer that part, go ahead and let us know in the chat again, and we'll try to do better answering that. Okay.
Well, I think, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Beth.
No, go ahead, Pete. I was
Well,
just going to say, we have a few things we could say about that. Yeah.
Sure. Great.
Yeah, I was going to say that supposedly the capacity of the channel right now is 160,000 cubic feet per second. This work doesn't change that number. It doesn't increase it. It doesn't decrease it. What it does is it supposedly reduces the effect of erosion on the existing bank and on the existing levee. So the big question really is, given the dam raise and the lowering of the spillway, is 160,000 cubic feet per second still the appropriate design of a flow that we should be designing for? So Beth, can you add on to that?
Yeah, I was going to take a level the angle of the velocities too. I wasn't sure if perhaps the question was a little bit about something that was raised, as like Bill showed some slides. There are different materials can withstand different velocities as they are exposed to them during water events, and as long as it's less than 8 feet per second, the trees will survive. The trees will be there and they will actually slow the flow near the levees, protecting the levees. And so river cobble can be used in that zone as well. And so instead of the really big riprap type rocks and having to bring big equipment in to install that, we've been saying that they could do a different method that involved using much smaller equipment like little bobcat loaders and bringing in river cobble. Just small, rounded river cobble, not small, but I mean, a certain size river cobble will withstand that flow. And that would be a solution for many of the stretches along this reach of the river, just to reinforce the area with the cobbles rather than this very heavily engineered, large quarried riprap solution.
Great, thank you, Beth. Okay, so Barbara has another question. Will the already failed mitigation areas where irrigation systems have become damaged or ineffective and many of the planted seedlings are dead and dying and the exposed soil is showing erosion and the feeble fencing is being breached, will these areas be prepared and replanted and then continuously monitored and managed over the coming years to ensure those areas grow into robust, vigorous riparian ecosystems and not just wither away from neglect? So will the area fail, will the area that already failed mitigation areas, will these be repaired and replanted and then
Well,
continuously monitored?
yeah, let me just try to start off and then people can jump in. It's my understanding, I think, that the Corps keeps an eye on their work for up to 5 years after the work is completed. I think it's 5 years, and they're responsible for making sure that it's done according to their specifications. After that time period, whether it's 5 years or a little more, a little bit less, then I believe the responsibility goes to SAFCA. Now, the question of how good a job they do in maintaining that is a whole nother story. Again, their report, that one report I mentioned about their mitigation, was very, very critical of the Corps' efforts. It doesn't really speak to the maintenance of their activities that they put in. So if anybody else wants to weigh in on that, I don't know if I got that 5-year time period right.
Beth, I see you're unmuted. Did you have something?
I will say that this was a concern that was raised a lot in the comments, is that there doesn't seem to be a really long-term provision for repair of mitigation sites or repair of the planting benches if they were to launch. That has been a concern by many agencies and by many commenters, for that very reason, is that if things fail, there isn't a clear plan in place to do further work. And some many people were here to witness some of the pilot revetments that they did in the 2011 timeframe and some of the mitigation that they did, the replanting offsite. Many things did not survive, and there was no subsequent work done to repair any of that mitigation. So that is definitely an area of concern.
And not only the mitigation sites, but the area where they did the work along the stream bank down by Sac State Campus Commons and so forth. To my knowledge, that's still basically just barren dirt for the most part, almost 2 years later. So we got the mitigation site that's underperforming and the restoration of the banks that seems to be underperforming. So I'd say they have a lot of work to do. I say, how about you get to work finishing what you've already done instead of coming up here and destroying more.
Yeah, and the species, they're not replacing exactly what they're
No,
removing.
not at all.
They're not bringing back oaks. They're
Well,
not.
those trees can never grow again because they'll immediately run into rock instead of soil
Yeah,
with their roots.
disconnects them from
Right.
the river. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're not bringing back the diversity and the variation that the habitat or that the species rely on there as habitats. So they kind of, the way I understand it is they kind of see revegetation, kind of vegetation is vegetation. You know,
Right.
they see
Well,
vegetation growing back and they're like, look, it's growing back, but it's not the same as what you took
And then
out.
the longer they wait, the more likely there will be a high flow event that will just wash out all their soil that's being planted before it has a chance, the vegetation has a chance to grow up. And I don't know if there's a contingency in place to replace that. So we could just end up with exposed riprap along the entire bank and no trees or vegetation whatsoever. If we get a big flow event, the 160,000 happens right now, you know, that's what could happen.
Great. Thank you guys. Thank you for your question. So iPad Joy, the drawing for the plan showed no levee access for 2+ years. Is that your understanding of what is planned?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep, because they have to close it off so that they can have their truck routes.
Yeah, from Howe Avenue all the way to Larchmont Park on the south side, and then a similar distance on the north side. No levee access, no river access for 2+ years. No walking along the levee or anything. So for 2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, and then Larchmont Park, the north end of that, along with several other parks that are being used as staging areas, won't be accessible either.
And again, if you want to take a closer look at the maps that we showed you in the presentation, you can find those on our website. Zoom in a little bit better. Okay, Lisa Merritt says, how many people visit the American Parkway annually? So we get estimated 8 million visits per year. And we generate 360 billion.
Million.
Million. 360 million in revenue for the local economy. So it's a, you know, we get people from all over the world coming here. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, the 8 million visits per year is more than Yosemite receives in a year. And now I better look to see what the number is for Yosemite. So I will look that up.
Well, it must be less than 5 million because when we used to think it was 5 million, it was still more than Yosemite. So, okay. So Annette says, you don't have to be a member to present a forum. Oh, okay. So she's referring to the Renaissance. You don't
Okay.
need to be a member to present a forum. Directions on all the Renaissance page. Thank you, Annette. We will be looking into that. Barbara, I love that you have all these questions, Barbara. Thank you. Regardless of one's opinion about the issue of homeless encampments along the river or the legality of such encampments, obviously such encampments will have to be cleaned. and the unhoused people who live near the river will be displaced. So does the current erosion control project have a mitigation plan in place to rehouse those displaced people?
Yeah, I would say, no, I don't recall any mention of homelessness in the environmental report.
Yep, nothing. Good question, though. Alicia, how does the slope of the banks play into the mitigation design? Right now, we have a handful of places with easy points of entry for boats and for swimming that will be lost with the steep banks. Is there any designs that you can suggest to protect these access points, protect our recreational access?
Well,
Bill?
Yeah,
Yeah.
refer to the bills.
I'm thinking, well, I don't know of any plans to maintain existing access trails, like for instance, the one at Larchmont Park. It's just going to be a graded bank of dirt for a while until the vegetation grows up. No specific trail that's going to be designed back into it. I think we're going to have to just create our own again in places where it makes sense.
Yeah, if I could weigh in on that, like Beth said earlier, they didn't even inventory any of the social trails or any of the beaches. They didn't even recognize it as a recreational opportunity. So there's nothing in their minds. I think there's nothing for them to mitigate because they don't even recognize that it's there to begin with.
Do we know of any alternative designs that could perhaps protect these access points?
Yeah, the one where you just use minimal river cobble along the erosion, or put in, the woody vegetation along the existing erosion, and basically leave the riverbank alone. Leave the trees alone, leave the trails alone. Just concentrate on shoring up the areas where we have a little bit of erosion. And then the part where they have from the erosion down to the water, I think it's fine, where they pretty much just make it kind of an even slope. So it'll be easier to walk down there. But from that point up, it's just going to be a barren dirt graded at a constant slope. So you won't even get any variation in the slope as you walk down. It's just going to be all just a boring, same slope all the way down.
Yeah, and if you walk down near the Avenue Bridge on the north side of the river right now, it's actually pretty dangerous because they've got this geotextile covering over the soil that's on top of the riprap. And that area supposedly is what's going to look most like what's below Larchmont Park, a few years in the future. And if you walk down on that slope that Bill just described, and you're walking on that textile, every so often your foot falls through about 1.5 feet. I mean, you could break your leg, you could certainly sprain your ankle. So it's a really unsafe slope. It would take quite a while to create any kind of social trails in it. So it's a huge oversight that they've neglected trails and reestablishing trails, inventorying them and reestablishing them. There's no thought at all in their plans right now as they stand.
Thank you. So Emily Ann is pointing out, I think in response to the displaced wildlife, they will be doing visual surveys for western pond turtles prior to construction she thinks about 3 days before. So yes, the western pond turtles are ones that they are concerned about. Does anybody else have anything to add about the western pond turtles?
Well, just from what I've learned from a couple of conversations with Michelle Stevens, it's extremely difficult to inventory western pond turtles because the way that I know I'm going to butcher this term, it's something like brumate. It's what they do instead of hibernation in the winter, and then even when they're out in the summer, they're hard to identify. Bill Avery's had some great luck recently taking pictures of them, sunning themselves on logs. But just going through and doing a visual 3 days before sure seems like it's, oh my God, that's nowhere near enough for any kind of protection for the western pond turtles.
Yes. We have our Michelle Stevens doing a lot of fighting on that front, defending the turtles. Okay. Richard, he says, good Zoom. Thank you, Richard. I live on estates. Who is the decision maker on this not well thought out project? And have they been here to look at it in person? Or is it being rammed down our throats like we can't drive internal combustion engines after 2035? I would like to volunteer to help stop this. We moved here in 1973 because of our beautiful river. Very nice, Richard. Yeah, so Pete, did you want to talk about the ultimate decision makers?
Well, I think, and I'll start, but Beth can come in and correct me when I go off track because she can describe it better than I can. But at the state level, the project is being reviewed under NEPA. That's the Federal National Environmental Protection Act and the California Environmental Quality Act. The Corps signs off on the NEPA, but they do have to get concurrence from the Department of Interior, and which includes the National Marine Fisheries Services as well as the National Park Service. The Central Valley Flood Protection Board, working together with the Department of Water Resources, are the agencies that sign off on CEQA certification. These are the certifications that the Corps said, gee, because of all the comments, we're not going to be able to get those certifications, so we can't have a construction season in 2025. And that's the reason we go every month, sometimes twice a month, and talk before the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, because they will have to have a hearing before they have a vote by their board to approve the certification of the CEQA environmental review. So though that's why we've been talking to them. We're also trying to influence our electeds, again, Congresswoman Matsui and Congressman Bera, to try to put pressure on the Corps to take our suggestions. Beth, did I screw any of that up, or can you expand on it?
I'll expand just a tiny bit, Pete. That was great. But I will say that it's important to realize that on the federal side, under the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA, USACE, or the Corps, has primarily ability to do self-approval of most of this. They are supposed to take into account opinions by the National Marine Fisheries Service and others, but none of that goes to a public voting body. There is no public vote on the federal side. On the state side, the CEQA does require the Central Valley Flood Protection Board to actually hold a hearing, as Pete said. So that's really important from our perspective in terms of leverage, because that is a public hearing. It's a formal process. It's recorded testimony. And so we are trying to get our comments there. And when they actually hold that final approval hearing, it would be helpful to have lots of people weighing in on that, because we don't have a parallel process on the federal side. There's no body that does have a public hearing.
Great, thank you, Beth. And Richard, we'd love to have you help us and volunteer. I put our email address as a response to your comment. If you want to email us, we can figure out what would work best for you. We have a few different things. So thank you for volunteering. You're volunteering. Okay.
He also asked a question about, did they come in person? And there is some interesting history there, right? A lot of the design was handled by a group out of state. In fact, they're from Minnesota, without seeing the river. And it's our understanding that once some of them did come and see the amazing wild and scenic river, they did make it a point to try to improve the design, but many parts of the design were already in place at that point. So the changes were kind of incremental, perhaps, rather than the kinds of redesigns that we're looking at, alternative designs altogether that don't require, destroying 680 trees. So yeah, that is a big concern about, are the engineers actually seeing this themselves?
Yeah, it's always different when you plan something with your eyes versus on paper.
And that's a good plug for our river tour on the 13th of October from 11:30 to 4. Richard, I hope you can come over and join us. We are going to try to get some of the electeds and staff for Congressman Bera and Congresswoman Matsui to come and join us that day, because, you're absolutely right. Once you see it in person, you'll walk away with a whole different opinion.
Yeah, we'll show you what they have planned for the project in the project area and see what we have, what we stand to lose. Okay, Barbara, we were down at the mitigation area, I like, last weekend by Paradise Beach, and it was a joke. Totally dried up, dying plants left to fend for themselves. Yes. Is sad.
That's because they didn't plan on the typical Sacramento summer, and we had an extra hot summer on top of it. So those plants are going to need a lot of water every single day, and apparently they weren't doing that.
Well, it sounds true from what Barbara said, is that the system that they designed to water the plants has failed, and they haven't adequately maintained it, and the plants aren't getting the water that they need. So
Right, and then within
not
days they would be dead because it's 100 and whatever degrees, baking in the sun all day.
Yep.
Okay. 7 Larson. Will the levees be off limits further east of the work area, such as east of estates, to access the levee further up river? Do you want to share those maps again, Pete?
Oh, let me see. Oh,
And
man.
it's basically from the Mayhew drain is where the inaccessibility starts, because that's where the trucks come in, is along the western levee of the Mayhew drain, and then to the west from there downstream. So everything east of there shouldn't be inaccessible.
And I think they were asking about the north side of the river, on the estates side of the river.
Oh, on that side,
Yeah.
I think it's a similar extent.
Okay, can people see that now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so if I move that, yeah, if you look right in that upper right corner where it says no levee river access for 2 years, you can kind of see the end of the orange polygon, or a dotted line. It's a yellowish, orangish, dotted line there. So, I think that's a bit further east than Estates Drive, but I can't tell you because it's almost directly north of the Mayhew Drain. I think it's further east of Estates Drive, but it's not all the way to Harrington Park.
And then all the way down to Howe Avenue on that side. That's
Yeah.
even longer than the south side. It's crazy.
And the south side is going to extend all the way to this little park down here, which I always forget the name of that park. It's Oakmont or
Oak
I
Meadow.
think it's Oak Meadow.
Are you talking about the north side, Pete?
No, I'm at the south side.
Oh.
I don't know if you're seeing my little cursor there. I think that's Glen Oak Park.
Yes. Yes.
And it looks like that whole park is a staging area because it says
Yeah.
it's inaccessible, the whole, at least where that yellow line is anyway.
Yeah.
And that is another thing on the north side of the river that we've heard some of the communities, the community neighborhood groups over there have been commenting heavily on the truck routes in and out, and the staging areas are of concern to them over there.
Well, you can see all those peninsulas of parks that are being closed on both the north and south side, where the yellow lines extend out. And
Yep.
there's what, 3 major ones on the north and 3 on the south. Larchmont, and then Waterton, and then Glen Oak. And then similarly on the opposite sides in about the same locations. All of those will be inaccessible. Oh, and then another one at the Howe Avenue Bridge. At the
Candace,
west
how
end.
we doing on questions?
We only have one more, or a couple more comments. Let me get through them, see if they're questions. Alicia says, thanks for assembling this. And Barbara says, thank you for this Zoom. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but here's my final thoughts. Mature riparian woodland and vegetation prevents erosion and increases stormwater infiltration, cools the water temperatures along the bank for native fish, yes, amphibians, reptiles, crustaceans, mollusks, mammals, birds, insects, and invertebrates that rely upon the water's edge habitat, slows the speed of water flow naturally, decreases atmospheric carbon, produces oxygen, helps stabilize climate change, provides diverse wildlife habitat, and benefits human mental and physical health and well-being. Mature riparian woodland and vegetation is a precious, rare treasure that very few cities can claim. It is essential that Sacramento and its surrounding communities retain this unique and important pristine riparian ecosystem for generations to come. You could not have said it better, and yes, we fully agree with all of that, and that is why we fight so passionately for changes in this project.
Yeah, that's so well said. Make sure we copy that chat.
Yeah, this is exactly, and the value of this space is not properly valued.
Well, that's a whole nother thing, you know, the Corps and government agencies in general are supposed to be, when they evaluate projects such as this, put a price tag on the environmental benefits of the work that they're doing, including the other benefits, the safety benefits and those things. And I think all those new guidelines came out after these designs were published. So there's, you know, that's another tactic we could use to try to get them to slow down, is to say they have to do the economic analysis, because the loss in recreation and habitat is enormous.
Great. Okay, Barbara says she has to leave. She's signing off. Again, thank you so much. Thank you, Barbara. And Katie Thomas says, thank you so much to everyone with art. I am so grateful to you all for standing up for the trees and bringing this horror to our attention. I'll support your work as best as I can. I live in Curtis Park, but frequently walk the trails of on the north side of the river. We even park at Estates in front of Pop-Up's corner. It gives us so much joy to go there. Thank you, Katie. Keep on loving the river. Okay, and that's the end of our questions here. If anybody has any last things, you have a minute while we say goodbye.
Yeah, I was just gonna say also, thank everybody for attending. And I really hope that we can meet you all in person on October 13th. And please share this with your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, your coworkers, people in clubs or your church groups, you know, whatever. We're doing all this voluntarily. Like I said earlier, we all moved here, we all live here because we love this area. And the last thing I want to do is wake up some morning and hear a bunch of bulldozers and chainsaws going. If that ever happens, I'll never forgive myself. So we're gonna do everything that we can to prevent that from happening. And it's great to know that there's so many people here in Sacramento that feel the same way. And yeah, please come out and join us on the 13th. And encourage your friends and neighbors, like I said, everybody else to do so.
And if you aren't on our mailing list yet, you can go to our website here and sign up. We'll be sending out a reminder for the event. And if Pete, you want to go back to that slide also.
There it is.
There it is.
Now,
And
Larchmont Community Park and the picnic area is where we're
Yeah.
gonna be
you'll get
congregating.
some free hot dogs, and we'll do some raffle drawings to get, you can get a shirt like Pete has. It says save the Parkway. And yep, there it is. And we'll take you on, there's 2 river tours, get there a little bit before 12. We're leaving at 12 and another one at 1:30. So come and see us. We'd love to have you. And we really appreciate you guys showing up today, because it's people like you who, we're fighting for you and
Well,
fighting
that's
for the trees.
the only way we're gonna achieve this is if we all work together.
Absolutely.